Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive.
Yeah.
Today we'll be looking at something I think is really relevant for our UPSC aspirants, getting ready for mains and even prelims
Oh,
in
absolutely.
EU-US relations.
Yeah.
But specifically, this really complicated issue of immigration, where India is kind of trying to walk this diplomatic tightrope.
Right.
So you've got India on the one hand cooperating with the U.S. and deportations of its citizens that, maybe came into the country illegally,
Mm-hmm.
but then also at the same time trying to protect the rights and the opportunities for its massive legal immigrant population that's already in the U.S.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. You have India cooperating with the U.S. on these deportations of citizens who came in illegally. But at the same time, India is determined to protect the rights and the opportunities that are available to its vast legal immigrant population in the U.S.
It's almost like they're on a tightrope,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're
Yeah.
trying to maintain this good relationship with the U.S., but they also have to stand up for their citizens.
Yeah.
And it's even more critical now because there's a potential for something like 20,000 Indians to be deported under the Trump administration's new policies,
Yeah.
which is a huge jump from the 1,100 or so that were deported last year.
Right. And it seems that the US government is becoming more assertive in its approach. There have been reports that ICE is considering using Guantanamo Bay as a detention center.
Guantanamo Bay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Which, is a detention camp that has been associated with some controversial moments in US history. And so the fact that they're considering using this location could definitely send a message internationally.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
It adds a whole other layer to this issue that's already so sensitive for India. I mean, think about it. There are an estimated 725,000 undocumented Indians living in the U.S.
Right.
Then you've got millions more who are there legally contributing to the American economy and society.
Exactly.
So India's got to walk this fine line here. They're trying to prevent mass deportations that would disrupt all these legal pathways that professional students and tourists rely on. But they also have to maintain these strong ties with the U.S. What does that even mean, bilateral ties? For those of us who maybe aren't so familiar with diplomatic jargon.
Bilateral ties simply refers to the relationship between two countries. So in this case, it's the relationship between India and the U.S.
So these bilateral ties are super important for both countries.
Yeah.
But how exactly is India handling this delicate situation?
Well, India is engaging in what we call strategic diplomacy. The External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, has been really involved in these high-level meetings, and they're using those diplomatic channels to try and work through this situation without damaging the relationship between the two countries.
So basically there's a lot of careful negotiation and communication happening behind the scenes.
Exactly.
But we can't forget about the people whose lives are directly affected by these policies.
Of course not.
I mean, imagine the anxiety and the fear that the undocumented Indian community in the U.S. must be feeling. The possibility of workplace raids is very real. I mean, it's forcing a lot of people to avoid public spaces, and they're living in constant fear.
Right. It's easy to focus on the politics of it all and forget that there are real people who are being affected by these decisions. And it's not just individuals, entire industries can be affected. We've seen reports of labor shortages in certain sectors because these undocumented workers are too afraid to go to work.
Yeah, and shifting gears a bit to another aspect of this, the H-1B visa program has become a huge concern for India.
It really has.
These visas are super important for Indian professionals, especially those in the tech sector who want to work in the U.S.
Yeah, you hear about H-1B visas all the time, but can you explain what they are and why they matter so much, especially for our UPSC folks who need to know this stuff inside and out?
Exactly.
Sure. So H-1B visas are temporary work permits that are given to skilled foreign workers who work in specialty occupations that require some kind of theoretical or technical expertise. And for India, this is critical because a huge part of their workforce, especially in the IT sector, rely on these visas to work in the U.S. In fact, last year, something like 72% of all H-1B visas went to Indians.
72%?
Yeah.
That's incredible.
Yeah.
It really shows how much Indian professionals and U.S. companies rely on this program.
Yeah.
We're talking about big companies like Infosys and TCS who secure thousands of these visas every year for their workers.
That's right. And it's interesting because President Trump while he's taken a strong stance on illegal immigration, he's also expressed support for the H-1B program.
Really?
He sees the value in it in terms of attracting skilled professionals to the United States.
So is that a bit of a contradiction? I mean, on the one hand, he's cracking down on illegal immigration, but then he's supporting a program that allows foreign workers to come to the U.S. legally.
Well, yeah, it does highlight the complexities of this issue.
All
The
right.
U.S. government recognizes the contributions that skilled immigrants make to the economy, but at the same time, they're trying to address these concerns about illegal immigration. And India is, of course, pushing for a more efficient visa application process for students and skilled workers.
So India is really trying to find that balance here.
Yeah.
I'm sure for a lot of our listeners, especially those preparing for the UPSC, this raises some questions about the future of India-U.S. relations. How might these tensions over immigration affect other areas of cooperation between the two countries? Things like trade and defense.
That's a great question, and it's one that we're going to explore further in this deep dive.
Fantastic. So let's jump in.
Okay. It's worth noting that even while the U.S. is really focused on, deportations, they do recognize the huge economic contributions of legal Indian immigrants.
Right. I mean, Indian Americans are known for being one of the most successful and highly educated demographic groups in the U.S.
Absolutely.
I mean, you've got doctors, engineers, entrepreneurs, academics. They're making a real impact.
Exactly. But there's also this political aspect to it. President Trump's Make America Great Again agenda, it really focuses on, stopping illegal immigration. And he campaigned hard on this issue. So his supporters expect him to take action.
Right.
And for the U.S., cooperating with countries like India on deportations is one way to show them they're serious about that promise.
It's so interesting how domestic politics can have such a big impact on international relations.
Yeah.
It's like this ripple effect.
Yeah.
So from India's point of view, how are they balancing their own interests with what the U.S. wants?
India's trying to be strategic about this. They understand the pressure President Trump is under when it comes to immigration.
Right.
So they're cooperating on deportations, but they're also making it very clear that they want to keep those legal pathways open for, students, skilled workers, tourists.
Sounds like a nuanced approach.
Exactly. They're cooperating on one hand, but firmly advocating for their interests on the other.
And it's not just about visas, right? I mean, India issued over 1 million visas to U.S. nationals last year,
Oh, yeah.
including a record number of tourist and business visas. They want to make sure that this whole deportation issue doesn't lead to the U.S. putting restrictions on their visas.
Absolutely. It's all about maintaining that flow of people back and forth.
Right. Keeping those lines of communication open.
Exactly.
It sounds like India is really walking the diplomatic tightrope. But what about the U.S. perspective? Aside from the political motivations, how do they view this whole situation?
Well, the U.S. definitely values what legal Indian immigrants bring to the table economically, and they acknowledge their role in American society, but they're also making it clear that they expect cooperation when it comes to deportations.
So there's this push and pull going on.
Yeah.
It makes you wonder how this could affect future collaborations between the two countries.
Right.
I mean, we've seen more and more cooperation in trade defense technology sharing. Could this become a sticking point?
It's definitely a valid concern. This whole situation really highlights how connected everything is globally. What might seem like a domestic policy issue in one country can end up affecting relationships and alliances all over the world.
That's such an important point for our UPSC folks.
Yeah.
It's not enough to just know the facts and figures. You have to be able to analyze the relationship between domestic policies and foreign relations.
Exactly. You have to understand why things are happening, what's motivating the players involved, and what the potential consequences could be.
It's like a game of chess.
Right.
Every move can change the whole board. So zooming out a bit, what does all of this tell us about how India approaches diplomacy on the world stage? I mean, we've talked about this strategic diplomacy, but what does that actually look like in practice?
Well, India is definitely becoming a bigger player on the world stage, and this situation is a perfect example of that. They're not just reacting to events, they're actively involved trying to control the narrative and protect their interests while maintaining important partnerships.
That's a balancing act.
Did it?
And it requires a deep understanding of the global landscape and being able to see challenges coming.
Exactly. And it's not just about the U.S. either. India is building relationships with countries all over the globe.
They're pursuing what's called a multi-alignment strategy, which is another important concept for our UPSC friends. Can you explain what that means in simple terms?
Basically, it means not limiting yourself to just one group or alliance. India is trying to build strong relationships with many different countries based on shared interests and mutual benefit.
So it's about being strategic and flexible, building a network of relationships to advance India's interests globally.
Exactly.
And this whole thing with the U.S. and deportations is a prime example of how that strategy works in the real world.
It is. It's a constantly changing situation, and we're going to look more at the possible implications in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay, so we've been really digging into this complicated situation between India and the U.S. with deportations and trying to keep their partnership strong.
Right.
What are the big takeaways for our listeners, especially those getting ready for those UPSC exams?
Well, I think it's really important to remember that international relations are rarely simple. There are always different points of view, often with competing interests.
Right.
And this situation with India and the U.S. is a perfect example of that.
So it's not just about, memorizing facts and figures.
Right.
You have to really understand the nuances of these relationships.
Exactly. It's about analyzing why countries do what they do. What are their motivations? What are the domestic pressures that are affecting their foreign policy decisions?
Yeah.
And this whole issue really highlights how important immigration is becoming on a global scale. It's not just about numbers. It's about people,
Right.
their lives, their hopes for a better future.
Absolutely.
And this is something that's probably going to become even more important in the years to come.
Absolutely. It's a reminder for all of us,
Yeah.
especially those who are hoping to shape policies one day, to really look beyond just the headlines and see the human impact of these decisions.
Yeah, definitely.
I think this situation also shows how India's role in the world is changing.
Oh, absolutely.
They're not just reacting to things anymore. They're actively involved in diplomacy, standing up for their interests and trying to shape the global conversation.
Yeah, it's a dynamic process. And this deportation issue is just one piece of the bigger puzzle when it comes to India-U.S. relations. You see cooperation in areas like trade and defense, but also points of disagreement.
Right.
And it's that interplay that makes this relationship so interesting and so important to understand.
Absolutely. So to wrap up today's deep dive, I want to leave you with a thought-provoking question.
Okay.
What does this situation tell us about the balance between domestic politics and international diplomacy in our interconnected world?
It's a great question, and there's a lot to consider.
And for our UPSC aspirants, analyzing these issues, understanding the historical context, and being able to present well-rounded perspectives will be really important.
It definitely will. And just a reminder, everything we've talked about today is based on the reporting from the Indian Express.
Right.
I encourage everyone to go check out their coverage for a more in-depth look at this story.
Understanding these nuances is essential for anyone who wants to stay informed about what's happening in the world. If you found this deep dive helpful, especially if you're studying for the UPSC, don't forget to like and subscribe to our channel for more analyses on important current events.
We'd also love to hear your thoughts and questions, so leave a comment below and let's keep this conversation going.
Thanks for joining us on this deep dive. We'll see you next time.